So there are a couple of things that might be going on here. So on the one hand, it could be that just at a very basic level, Musk has quickly observed a 40% decline in sales in Tesla in Europe.
Imagine this: the largest trade union in North America, built over decades, collapses before your eyes. America imposes crippling tariffs on cars. Prices soar, factories grind to a halt, and workers lose their jobs. But while the White House snaps up business relations with its closest neighbor, Canada, Europe is quietly and quickly picking up the fallen flag of leadership, while Washington argues, Brussels acts. And in this new geopolitical game, the stakes are not just cars or aluminum. At stake are economic hegemony, military dominance, and the very future of the dollar as the world's currency.
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
Today, for the first time in its history, Canada is openly declaring that it will no longer be Washington's puppet. The country's new Prime Minister, former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, is not a politician, he is a strategist. His steps are calibrated, his moves are thought out for several years ahead. And now he is doing what even the most courageous leaders have hesitated to do: renegotiating a $19 billion defense contract with the United States, challenging dollar dependence, and concluding multi-billion-dollar agreements with Europe and the BRICS countries. Yes, it is Canada, the same Canada that for years was considered a junior partner, that is now becoming a catalyst for global change.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump, promising to bring manufacturing back home, is setting off a chain reaction. 25% tariffs on auto parts and raw materials are hitting the American consumer. Car prices skyrocket, supply chains are broken, and the only one left to benefit is China. While US auto companies are counting losses and discussing cuts, Beijing is increasing exports and taking the lead in the global market. Who loses? The American family that can no longer afford a new car. Who wins? Those who adapt quickly and move away from dependence on Washington. And while all this is going on, Trump and Musk's most loyal supporters, former symbols of the MAGA movement, start burning campaign flags and posting videos accusing them of betrayal. Frustration turns to anger, anger to protest, and protest to political isolation. Europe arms itself, Canada gains independence, and the US suddenly finds itself alone, at the crossroads of economic collapse and diplomatic rejection.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
This is not just a story about tariffs. This is a wake-up call that America is losing ground. And the question is no longer how expensive the new car will be. The question is whether the US can keep its place in the new world order or cede it to others. This issue is about how former allies are being turned away, how new coalitions are being born, and why this time things really could change forever. Donald Trump's 25% tariff on cars and parts made outside the US was not just a trade measure, it was the beginning of a crisis that is now engulfing not just the auto industry, but the entire consumer economy. Behind the statement made from high podiums were tens of millions of lives, factory workers, dealership owners, transportation companies, and ordinary Americans dreaming of a new car. When the president promised that these tariffs would make America great again, the reality was quite different. Just weeks after the duties were announced, car prices began skyrocketing. The Ford Explorer, which cost $42,000 in base trim, went up to $51,000. The Jeep Grand Cherokee went from $38,000 to nearly $47,000. And that was just the start. The price rise did not stop at new cars. The used segment, reacting to the shrinking supply, jumped 18% in one quarter, which was a record for the last 40 years.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
However, the most worrying thing is not even in the numbers. The problem is in supply chains that have been built up over decades and have suddenly started to fall apart. For example, the gearboxes for the Ford F-150 came from Mexico, electrics from South Korea, brake systems from Germany, and steel from Canada. With the tariff in place, each of those parts suddenly became 25% more expensive. This means that every batch of cars assembled in the US was unprofitable before production even began. Companies like General Motors and Stellantis began renegotiating contracts en masse. At GM's plant in Lordstown, Ohio, 780 workers received temporary suspension notices. In Kentucky, Ford said it was freezing hiring and switching to a 2-shift schedule instead of 3. In Tennessee, an electric motor company laid off 40% of its workforce in 1 month. These weren't private episodes. This was a wave sweeping across the country. While Washington reported on the return of production, companies began to choose between two options: either sharply raise prices on finished products, risking the loss of customers, or automate processes, completely eliminating human labor, and most chose the latter. One of the largest US auto companies, Delta Motors, which exists in the southern states and produces more than 200,000 cars a year, by early spring announced the introduction of a new automated assembly line, replacing 2,400 jobs. At the same time, company CEO Charles Nolan bluntly stated at a press conference, "Tariffs are forcing us not to hire people, but to cut people."
But they are not ruling out the possibility that this was arson. At the same time, as you just mentioned, there are groups that have been organizing ongoing and peaceful protests at Tesla dealerships around the world. These demonstrations targeting Elon Musk and his affiliation with the Trump administration. Italy's prime minister is said to be close friends with Musk, and there were reports that Teslas have been vandalized in her hometown in Italy. Diane.
By the time the markets began to react, it appeared that not only production, but confidence had been hit. Ford shares fell 5.3% in a 24-hour period. General Motors is down 6.1%. Even Tesla, despite its minimal dependence on foreign components, recorded a 3% drop as investors began to fear the general instability of the sector. Financial analysts from Simmons Global called what was happening an economic boomerang. Measures aimed at protecting domestic interests hit those interests harder than any external threats. And all this was happening against the backdrop of China expanding its influence while America was building tariff walls. While the US debated how to bring assembly back home, Chinese automakers were increasing exports by 47% in 6 months, signing new contracts with Argentina, the UAE, and even Poland. Companies like BYD and NIO were entering markets previously dominated by American brands. In Portugal, for example, a deal was signed earlier this year to supply 14,000 Chinese electric cars with zero customs duty, just when similar US models became unaffordable due to price hikes. Beijing simultaneously invested in logistics, infrastructure, and even factories in Eastern Europe. And while the US was discussing how many years it would take to bring back supply chains, China was already taking the places America was losing.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
But the most important thing about this process wasn't even that America was losing the global race. The worst part was that it was losing to its own population, because there were no domestic winners in this race. Purchasing power had plummeted. According to the National Auto Club, the average number of new cars purchased on credit fell 26% in the first 2 months after the tariffs were introduced. People started refusing to upgrade their cars, switching to car sharing, and postponing purchases, Credit bureaus recorded record delinquencies on auto loans, especially among young people and middle-income families. Detroit opened its first free service station in 15 years, sponsored by a local labor union, where cars were repaired for those who could no longer afford replacements. The crisis did not end there, however. A second blow followed on the automakers themselves, but now no longer through economics, but through chain logic. Production processes, previously balanced and harmonized, were destroyed. Due to the lack of brake systems from Mexican plants, Ford suspended production of the Mustang model for 2 weeks. Because of aluminum shortages from Canada, GMC cancelled production of new SUVs for the summer. General Motors had idled shops in Indiana because even packaging materials previously shipped from Vietnam were now unprofitable. Every little part, every fastener, every electrical circuit that used to be taken for granted now required a separate decision, separate approval, and additional cost. And each of them added not only to the price, but also to the delivery time. Customers who pre-ordered Chevrolet Tahoe were waiting for the car not 2 months, as before, but 7 months.
Hey Diane, this investigation really just beginning, and one of the key elements will of course be the surveillance video, and investigators potentially have a lot of it to work with as they try to figure out what caused this fire. We know that surveillance footage has been turned over, including video from each of the cars, which could prove vital to understanding what happened here, because each vehicle has its own camera system that works even when the car is off, and 16 cars burned in this fire, and right now investigators don't know what caused it.
Against this background, questions began to sound more and more often. Does it really make sense to fight for the return of production at any cost? Is economic independence worth the fact that the average American cannot afford a basic car model? These questions have begun to be asked not only by journalists, but also by voters themselves, because the effect of these decisions made at the top was felt by everyone, from the owner of a transportation company in Arizona to a schoolteacher in Illinois who put off buying a car for the second year in a row. And that was just the first wave. When it became known in April that Canada was suspending a multi-billion-dollar contract to buy F-35 fighter jets, Washington took it as a signal that the old partnership was no more. The decision, taken personally by Prime Minister Mark Carney, was a continuation of the course of gaining economic and political autonomy from the United States. For the first time in decades, Ottawa did not just declare disagreement, it began to act, demonstrating that Canada would no longer accept the role of a younger brother, obediently supporting any initiatives of Washington. This set off alarm bells at the Pentagon. The procurement had already begun, with 16 planes actually in the final stages of transfer. But Carney did not waver. Live on Canadian television, he said, "We're not putting billions into a union that is no longer a union. We're not buying dependence. We are building independence."
We've accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
He praised all the domestic actions he has taken so far on immigration.
And I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country.
And spending cuts.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple.
The context of that statement goes deeper into the political rift that has formed between the US and Canada since the imposition of harsh US trade tariffs, first on the auto industry, then on aluminum and timber. Canada, for which the auto industry and commodity exports were among its key revenue streams, was faced with an ultimatum. But instead of making concessions, Carney turned in the opposite direction. The following week, a strategic memorandum was signed with the European Union, establishing a common ground for the EU and Canada to share technology in military aviation, autonomous weapons, and cyber defense. At the same time, negotiations began with Sweden for the purchase of Gripen E fighters, cheaper, easier to maintain, and adapted to Arctic conditions. All this was accompanied by the announcement of the construction of a new aviation center in the province of Alberta, which will create more than 7,000 jobs and specialize in servicing European military equipment. But these moves are not just military moves. They are fundamental changes in strategic thinking. Carney has made no secret that his task is to rewrite the very model of Canada's dependence on the United States. His speeches increasingly include terms like multipolar alliance, fiscal decentralization, and sovereign partnership. Beneath that is real action. Canada is renegotiating nearly 60% of its existing contracts with US companies, including in cybersecurity, energy and defense consulting. The federal budget has allocated $1.3 billion to reorient supply to European and Asian contractors. The National Supply Service has already suspended purchases of 22 types of components from the US, replacing them with counterparts from Germany and Japan.
Tesla is a peaceful company. We've never done anything harmful. I've never done anything harmful. I've only done productive things. So I think we just have a deranged, there's some kind of mental illness thing going on here, because this doesn't make any sense.
At the same time, tensions in the public discourse have risen sharply. The US media called Canada's actions a provocation and a betrayal of strategic partnership. On Fox News Live, Donald Trump said, "If Canada continues to play independence, we will respond with economic isolation. America will not feed those who spit in our face." In response, Carney held a press conference where he directly rejected Trump's rhetoric, emphasizing that Canada is no longer a vassal. The phrase "we are not the 51st state" instantly went viral and topped global news headlines. Just 3 days later, a rally of more than 40,000 people took place in Ottawa under the slogan "Not your state, not your army, not your interests."
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
Meanwhile, another transformation began to take place in the US, but not from above, but from below. Former ardent supporters of the MAGA movement, who had previously voted for Trump with full confidence in his course, began to express anger and frustration. The turning point was a video posted on TikTok by a Missouri farmer burning a Trump campaign flag and saying, "We were promised jobs, stability, and America for Americans. And what have we gotten? Prices that hit the wallet and policies that work against us." Within 2 days, the video had racked up 4.3 million views. Dozens of similar videos followed: auto mechanics, construction workers, truckers, retirees, each sharing their story. They talked about how tax breaks had disappeared, how it had become impossible to pay their mortgages, how a government that promised to be popular had become an elitist club of billionaires.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
The reaction was particularly strong after news that Elon Musk had poured more than $19 million through his foundations into far-right candidate Brad Schimmel's campaign in Wisconsin, handing out cash outside polling places and putting on a cheese hat autograph show. Despite this, Schimmel lost to Democrat Susan Crawford by a landslide, and Musk became the target of ridicule and criticism. In response, the first rallies were held in Michigan, Georgia, and Arkansas, where former MAGA supporters openly accused Trump and Musk of betraying the interests of the middle class. Newspapers spoke of a movement of the betrayed, a new generation of protesters who used to vote Republican and now demand a complete overhaul of policy. Amidst all this, international isolation has also increased. Following Canada, Portugal announced it was suspending its purchase of F-35s, saying that US policy is bringing instability to allies. In France, hearings began on removing some military contracts from US control. Germany has proposed the creation of an autonomous European command center independent of Washington. All this is a chain reaction triggered by drastic and ill-considered steps in the US economy and international politics.
Tesla shares have slumped by more than 9% amid a fall in sales in Europe. The electric vehicle maker posted lower sales across 5 European countries, including France and the UK. Joining us now to discuss this is CBS News foreign correspondent Remi Inocencio. Remi, why do we believe these sales are dropping? What's driving that?
Sure. Well, Errol, basically what Elon Musk has been talking about over the past, say, few months, ever since Donald Trump's election back to the White House, that has been fueling this anger, this frustration, some even say disgust towards Musk, and they're taking it out on Tesla. Tesla now feeling the pain. But because of what's happening here in Europe, Tesla sales fell by nearly half across the continent just last month, 45%.
But behind these words and actions lies a deeper process, a change in the very architecture of international relations. NATO, which for 75 years has been governed from Washington, is beginning to gradually shift its center of gravity toward Brussels. On the sidelines, the first stages of forming a unified European army independent of the US command are already being discussed. According to insider information leaked by the Swiss publication Newsstimme, negotiations are underway to create a joint headquarters that would make key decisions without the Pentagon. This process is being supported in Berlin, Rome, Madrid, and the Baltic states, especially after it became clear that American strategy had become too unpredictable and focused on internal power struggles. Against this backdrop, the question is becoming more and more acute. How long can the US maintain its status of world leader if even its oldest partners are beginning to look for alternatives? And here, perhaps, is where the most important, not military, but economic, dimension of the crisis comes into play. What began as a dispute over tariffs and manufacturing has evolved into a systemic shift in trust. America, which for decades built economic clout through the dollar and technology corporations, now faces growing skepticism. Many countries have begun to actively discuss the idea of an alternative monetary system based on something other than the dollar. Canada and France have already officially announced their support for the project of a central digital currency independent of American control. China and India are actively testing their own platforms, and the UAE is considering converting energy contracts into euros and yuan. Against this background, it is becoming clearer and clearer the US no longer controls global processes, but reacts to them, and more often, belatedly. The most alarming thing is that even inside the country, these signals are beginning to be perceived more and more acutely. Ratings of trust in the government and major corporations are falling. Mass protests, recently mentioned in the context of MAGA disappointment, are gaining momentum. And now these are not just emotional outbursts, they are the beginning of a conscious demand for new policies. According to the Harding Research think tank, 52% of respondents between the ages of 25 and 45 believe that America has lost its moral and political grip in the world. Moreover, 47% support the idea of global balance, where the US is just one of the equal players, not a hegemon. Symbolic of this was an incident in Ohio, where at a rally a local veteran who had previously supported Trump said, "When you serve the country, you expect the country not to turn its back on you. Now we've just become pawns in someone else's game." These words drew applause not only from the veterans, but also from the young participants of the meeting. The journalists present noted that for the first time the slogans were not only anti-government, but also anti-system. People are tired of illusions. They no longer want to pay for someone else's mistakes, for strategies that work only in the interests of corporations, but not in the interests of the nation. All these processes show that the United States finds itself in strategic isolation. Europe is going its own way. Canada is building a parallel model. Asia is getting stronger and proposing new rules of the game. The world is becoming different. And the question now is not whether America can restore old ties. The question is whether it's too late to have any influence at all. Because when you are no longer setting the agenda, but only responding to it, you are no longer a leader. You're catching up.